Welcome back, everyone. We are now looking at processes and landforms at convergent plate boundaries. Our two main areas of focus today are what's happening at convergent plate boundaries and what types of activity and features occur there. The second thing is, how are features and tectonic activity different when different types of lithosphere meet at convergent plate boundaries? So, what happens when there's oceanic lithosphere meeting oceanic lithosphere? Or, in this example, in the picture we've got, oceanic lithosphere meeting continental lithosphere. And finally, the last combination, continental lithosphere meeting continental lithosphere. Our learning goals for this part are: describe the processes that occur at convergent plate boundaries where oceanic lithosphere subducts beneath a continental plate. Explain the formation of the landforms at an oceanic, continental, or ocean-continent convergent plate boundary. Describe the processes that occur at convergent plate boundaries where oceanic lithosphere subducts beneath an oceanic plate. Explain the formation of the landforms at an ocean-ocean convergent plate boundary. Describe the processes that occur at continent-continent convergent plate boundaries. And finally, explain the formation of landforms at continent-continent convergent plate boundaries. To review, convergent plate boundaries occur where two plates move towards each other and interact, producing these processes and features that we're looking at this time. A reminder, a big process that can occur at convergent boundaries is called subduction. And in this case, the denser plate is got to be one of the oceanic lithospheric plates, descends into the asthenosphere and below, and this occurs at convergent boundaries with oceanic lithosphere. Again, because the only kind of plate that can subduct into the mantle, the rest of the mantle, is oceanic lithospheric plate. Major processes occurring at convergent plate boundaries with subduction include, imagine that, subduction, magma formation, the formation of mountain ranges on land, and seismic activity or earthquakes. So let's walk through a few of the features and processes that generally occur. First, friction between the two plates as they converge causes them to bend down together, making this long, narrow valley called the trench. Second, water from the subducting plate is given off to the overriding plate, and the weird thing about this, that actually causes the overriding plate, part of it, to melt, or the area between the plates, so the asthenosphere between the two plates can actually melt in this case. Magma rises, that's generated from that melting process, and it can solidify underground, or it can erupt from volcanoes. And then finally, both the volcanoes forming from the production of magma and the fact that the continental area is basically crumpled and forced upwards and downwards and thickens. Both of those things can form mountain ranges along the coast at convergent plate boundaries with subduction. A characteristic of convergent plate boundaries with subduction is that the volcanoes that form are in a line off to the side of the plate boundary, and in general that landform known as the trench, the long narrow valley, marks the location of the plate boundary. So the volcanoes will be in a rough line parallel to but off to the side of the plate boundary. They also tend to follow a slightly curved shape, and you might notice that plate boundaries do this too. So this slightly curved line of volcanoes is called a volcanic arc. Continental lithosphere is the thickest type, and the subducting plate falls deep into the mantle, and what this means is there's a really big area for earthquakes to occur. So we get very deep earthquakes, up to 700 kilometers below the surface. That's a hard one to picture. And also the earthquakes can be very large, release a huge amount of energy. So the largest earthquakes we know of have all been produced in this kind of plate boundary. The pattern you'll notice is that earthquakes at convergent plate boundaries with subduction, the earthquakes start off as fairly shallow near the plate boundary, and as the earthquakes follow that subducting plate down into the mantle, they get deeper and deeper and deeper. So you tend to see sort of different lines of earthquake depths moving away from the plate boundary. We've got another short video animation for you here. Again, if you would like to watch this with the closed captioning, which is, I think, a very highly recommended thing to do, you can click on this, only this part of the video that's linked in our e-learning site. Okay, so we're going to work through our list of tectonic processes and list of tectonic features and landforms just like we did with divergent plate boundaries. So let's start with melting or magmatism. Yes, there is melting or magmatism at convergent plate boundaries, and that we're starting here with ocean continent or oceanic continental plate boundaries just like we've been looking at before in our sequence. So this will be kind of the basis of our understanding of convergent plate boundaries. We do have melting occurring. Notice that it's off to the side of the plate boundary because that's where melting is happening, and so that's going to produce volcanoes off to the side as well. Now let's take a look at earthquakes. As we discussed before, and you've had a chance to work through some different examples as part of the lab, earthquakes do occur at all types of plate boundaries, and in particular continental, oceanic, convergent plate boundaries. This is a distinct pattern, shallow to deep, near the boundary, getting deeper off to one side. And again, very shallow as well as deep and very strong earthquakes are possible here. Let's talk mountains or mountain building. So mountains form near the coast on the continent at this type of plate boundary, both from volcanoes and crumpling up and down of the continental crust. So they're going to be in a line that's parallel to but offset or off to the side of the plate boundary. So again, mountains are forming both by volcanoes and by uplift of the crustal area. Do we have continental rifting here? No, we do not. Rifting means pulling apart and everything's being crushed or crunched together here, so we will not have continental rifting, even though at least we have a continent in this example. Is there seafloor spreading at this ocean continent convergent plate boundary? No, we're not creating new seafloor here. In fact, the oceans get smaller with subduction. No spreading here, no seafloor spreading. How about subduction? Subduction is basically when an oceanic plate dives under another plate, so that's definitely happening here. The answer is yes. How about collision? Collision means two plates of continental crust converging, not happening here. Faulting is our last tectonic process, and faulting occurs at every kind of plate boundary along with earthquakes. Faulting is usually widespread at convergent plate boundaries. Some of the biggest and strongest faults occur here. So this is basically a matter of review at this point. We are probably getting tuned in. You're probably getting tuned in to these features. So volcanoes, volcanic activity, yes. A belt or line of volcanoes is parallel off to the side of the plate boundary. Faults occur at all three types of plate boundaries, occurring here. Mountain ranges on land. Yes, mountains are forming parallel to and off to the side of the plate boundary near the coast on the continent. Do we have a mid-ocean ridge? We do not. There's no ridge in the ocean here. We do have sort of the alternate landform, which is the trench, but no ridge. The plate boundary, this long, narrow V-shaped valley. And last but not least, do we have a rift valley? We do not. There's no rift valley here. That would occur only divergent continental plate boundaries. So we have a different type of convergent plate boundary here. Depicted as an ocean-ocean or oceanic-oceanic convergent plate boundary. The good news for you is that these are nearly identical to the ocean-continent variety and has almost all of the same features. However, you'll notice we don't have land in the sense that we don't have a continent here. So there's going to be a couple of differences. Instead of having a curved line of mountains on land, this type of plate boundary has a curved line of volcanoes or volcanic islands. And so this is called an island arc because the islands tend to form a curve or an arc shape, as you see it in map view. So let's summarize the features that are different and similar here. So melting, yes, same situation as with continental oceanic convergent plate boundaries. Earthquakes, yes, same. Mountain building on continents? No, because there's no continent here, so we don't have mountain building on continents. Continental rifting? No, only occurs at divergent plate boundaries. Seafloor spreading? No, also only occurs at divergent plate boundaries. Subduction? Yes. Collision? Need two continents coming together, not happening. Faulting? Yes, occurs at every type of plate boundary. How about those tectonic characteristics in landforms? How about volcanoes and volcanic activity? Yes, and they have the same pattern as convergent boundary with oceanic and continental crust. That is, they're parallel and off to the side of the plate boundary. How about faults? Yes. How about mountain ranges on land? No, no mountains here, just volcanoes, and that's a weird distinction, but we do make that distinction. How about mid-ocean ridge? Again, only at divergent plate boundaries in the ocean. Deep ocean trench? Yes, this is our long, narrow valley that marks the plate boundary at the surface. Rift valley? No, only divergent boundaries in continents. So I want to emphasize that the line of volcanoes that you see in both kinds of convergent plate boundaries with subduction, they have different names. If it's a line of mountains including volcanoes on land, this is called a volcanic arc. A curved line or arc of volcanic islands, when we have only oceanic crust, this is called an island arc. We have some differences now with our last type of convergent plate boundary. This is between continental crust or continental lithosphere and continental lithosphere. One big thing you should notice is when two continental plates converge, it turns out they're the same density and neither can subduct. Subduction is what drives magma formation, trench formation, and volcano formation. So, at this particular type of convergent boundary, no magma, no trench, no volcanoes. Instead, we get the lithosphere thickening, making the biggest mountain ranges in the world, like the Himalayan mountains. And this extra thick lithosphere allows very large magnitude earthquakes at faults, shallow to moderate, even sometimes fairly deep depths. So what's different then about convergent boundaries that are collisions, that is, convergent boundaries where continental crust or lithosphere is meeting the other plate of continental crust and lithosphere? First of all, there's no melting. There isn't a mechanism for making magma here with no subduction, and so not possible. Earthquakes are also here, shallow to deep, so that's a similarity. Mountain building is even more expressed here. The largest mountain ranges on land are at these types of boundaries. The only big one we have today is the Himalayan mountain range, or the Himalaya, between the subcontinent of India and the rest of Asia. So that gives you an idea of the size of mountains that are typically produced. We think that's pretty typical of a collision kind of plate boundary like this. Continental rifting, nope, that's only with divergent boundary as well as seafloor spreading. A difference would be no subduction here compared to other kinds of convergent boundaries, and we call that process collision where the two continents are colliding. Faulting, there's a big fault here shown by plate boundaries. Some of the larger faults around and most tectonically active that is prone to earthquakes are in this area. As far as characteristics goes, again, since there's no melting, there's no volcanic activity. There is faulting, there are mountain ranges on land, and as we've talked about before, no mid-ocean ridges or rift valleys, not at a convergent boundary. And the thing that's different here between this type of convergent plate boundaries, and with subduction would be there's no deep ocean trench or trench here. The most common place you're going to find convergent boundaries is along the edges of continents, or if there's an area that sort of has islands on one side, so think Japan or the Aleutian Islands, New Zealand, part of the Caribbean, Sumatra and other places in Indonesia are all major areas with convergent boundaries with subduction in this case. Okay, to review, I've got a couple questions for you. Which features tectonic activity would you expect to see at a convergent plate boundary with subduction? As the usual procedure, take a minute or two to read the options, try to come up with the best answer on your own, and then after you've paused, come back and we'll go over it. So the features and activity you'd expect to see at a convergent plate boundary with subduction are basically those at E. You'd expect to see a trench, shallow to deep earthquakes, volcanoes or volcanic activity parallel to the boundary but off to the side, and a mountain range on land. What features and tectonic activity would you expect to see at a continental convergent plate boundary? So no subduction. Take a minute, consider the options, and we'll let you know what the best answer is. The best answer here would be B. You would see collision, shallow to deep earthquakes, mountain ranges on land, and that would be at continental convergent plate boundaries. That's it from here. See you soon.